daughter do most of the talking. All I did the talking when we made the book out, because there's lots of things that she didn't know that happened. So I tried to update as much as we could. But it took 4.5 years to publish it. But we've had 3 publications, so we've done all right. Yeah.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you, Enid, for inviting us here today. I certainly appreciate your interest in the Royal Oak history. My name is Colleen Marsel. I live in Duncan with my husband, Bob, and this is my father, Norm Pimlott. And Dad and I worked together for about 5 years to put a book together about the Pimlott family history. And I was just so delighted, but I had no idea how much joy that he would get from this book. So I'm a little emotional. I can't help it. It's just the way I am. But anyway, what I thought I'd do is just short and sweet, kind of go through the Pimlott family history and where we lived and what they did, and then in a short, concise area, sort of put the other part where he was not living in Royal Oak and whatnot, sort of summarize what he did in his life so that you know who this gentleman is sitting next to me. So I'm going to do some reading from the book, and the nice thing was we had to get this book together in a hurry because it was for Mom and Dad's 65th wedding anniversary. So it was really a challenge to get everything done. If you've ever put a book together before, it's a lot of work, and there's so much, it's such a learning curve. But anyway, I enjoyed it thoroughly. So I want to take a swig of water first. I want to just read a little bit about the history of Dad's family. And so I'll go just read what I think you might be interested in. And then if you've got questions, you can ask Dad afterwards, okay? Super. And I'm sure Dad's got a few notes himself, so he wants to mention a few people's names like Enid had mentioned that maybe some of you people know. So this is written in my dad talking, okay? Not me, but my dad, okay? So he's saying his dad was the eldest of 3 sons. He had 2 brothers, George Ernest Pimlott, born in 1876, and William Ewart Pimlott, born in 1886. Dad had his schooling, so he's saying his dad had his schooling in Manchester, England, and received an electrical degree in 1884, as shown on his electrical certificate. After Dad's mother passed away with consumption in March 1888, Dad decided he would immigrate to Canada, leaving behind his father, his stepmother, and his 2 brothers. On March 15th, 1889, he left England by ship to travel to Canada. His younger brother, George Pimlott, followed Dad to Canada in 1894, while his youngest brother, William Ewart Pimlott, came to Canada in 1906 with the help of my dad and his brother, George. Dad had a slight build with reddish-colored hair and freckles and a long flowing mustache. He remained quite slim all his life. He was an extremely gentle, easygoing, honest man. Although he always said he was not a wealthy man, in my book, his wealth was in the good deeds he did for his fellow man. On arriving in Canada on March 15, 1889, he traveled to Elkhorn and later Kirkella, Manitoba, 2 farming communities in Manitoba, and somehow managed to withstand the terribly cold winters there. He worked on a farm for about 2 years for a very kind couple, Mr. and Mrs. John Harry. At the time, the CPR Railway was encouraging people to homestead all across Canada, particularly the prairies, offering reasonably priced land to bring workers and settlement there. March 31st, 1889, Dad took up a homestead on a piece of land about 5.5 miles west of Elkhorn. In 1891, Dad also received word of the death of his father in Manchester. In 1894, Dad's brother George came out to visit him and later traveled to Dauphin and Portage la Prairie. For a few years, Dad plowed and worked his farm with oxen, but later had a team of horses and a fast pony. He became acquainted with other men and women in the district, among who were his friends George and Eliza Ann Rushby, who had purchased a farm in 1892 about 10 miles away, just south of Elkhorn. His fast pony came in handy when he came to visit a certain young lady who later became Mrs. James W. Pimlott, Dad's mom. Mom and Dad got engaged, but they didn't expect to get married for quite a while. Sadly, George Rushby's wife, Eliza Ann, passed away unexpectedly in October 1899, and George and his son then decided to return to England. He asked my father to look after his young daughter, Louisa May Rushby, 12 years his junior, which he did. He married her. Yes, that's right. They rode into town on their fast horse and buggy and were married on October 10, 1899, by Reverend John Lewis at the Methodist Church Parsonage in Elkhorn, Manitoba, witnessed by his friends, the Harrys, and of course Louisa's dad, George and her brother Dick Rushby. They did not expect to have a honeymoon, as it was a busy harvest time, but nature intervened in the form of a snowstorm that very night. And they had a honeymoon at home with nothing to do but feed the horses. Anyway, let's see. Now we're getting into some interesting spot for you. My dad and his brother were acquainted with other young men in the district. On an adjoining homestead, there was a young man from Northern Ireland named Robert Cuddy. Some of you know Robert Cuddy. Bob was his name. For some years, Bob and Dad assisted each other in harvest time. Bob did the pitching and Dad stacked the hay and grain. Bob Cuddy would remain a friend of his for many, many years to come. So in 1900, they left Elkhorn, Manitoba, and came to Vancouver by the CPR Railway. They came to Victoria on the CPR ferry in December 1902. Mom and Dad first settled in the Strawberry Vale, Kerry Road area off Burnside, where they opened a general store. Dad was the first postmaster on Strawberry Vale from June the 1st, 1908 to September the 14th, 1911. Upon selling the store and moving to Saanich, my parents joined the South Saanich Methodist Church, and Dad was appointed Sunday school superintendent. He also sang in the choir of South Saanich Baptist Church, held in the East Tempest Hall on Sunday evenings. In this picture, my dad is in the back row. They had a church picnic, and I'm going to pass these pictures around. And there's, this is a church, oh sorry, you need to be in here. A church picnic in 1903 in the limestone quarry, and that was in exactly the same place as Butchard's Gardens. And so I see my grandpa here and my grandmother here with their little ones. So just 1903, so it's lovely. In December 1911, Dad's friend Bob Cuddy took a trip to California. Dad's oldest boy, George, now 11 years old, and Dad went on a trip to the old country while my mom and the other three children at the time, Elsie, Alfred, and Charlie Pimlott, went to visit her family in Washington State. They all had a good holiday. At one point, Dad was considering returning on the ship RMS Titanic, but fortunately changed his mind and returned a little earlier. The Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912. So this book could have been a lot shorter. Right. They moved to the Royal Oak area of Saanich in 1912 and purchased a grocery store known as the Royal Oak General Store. He then built a new building for the store near the Municipal Hall and went into partnership with his brother George. It became known as Pimlott Brothers, Royal Oak Grocery. They sold general merchandise, feed, groceries, hardware, and butcher shop meats. Dad was the only person I knew that could add up 3 columns of figures in his head, and at lightning speed too. These wonderful family pictures can also be found on the very first pages of the Saanich Archives for the Royal Oak area. And so there's a picture there of the family outside the store, Dad's mom and dad, and the staff and whatnot inside, including Bob Cuddy, who was the delivered the post. And they all, so I'm just going into that now.
With a horse and buggy. With
a horse and buggy. And we have a picture passing around that actually shows Bob Cuddy on his horse and buggy. They also had the services of the Royal Oak Post Office in the store, initiating the new rural route. Rural Route number 1 designation for the Royal Oak area. This building still stands at 4520 West Saanich Road in Victoria. Dad became the first postmaster here on March 1st, 1912, until February 1st, 1923, and his neighbor Bob Cuddy was the first postman, a position which he held for many years. I remember my dad telling me many stories about the store. In 1916, Victoria had a very bad snowstorm. They lived in the house behind the store. Grandpa built that house as well. And so they lived in that house behind the store. One night, it snowed so hard in 1916 that the army was needed to dig them out in the morning. They helped dig a tunnel from the house to the store so that they were able to sell groceries and major necessities to the neighborhood. Otherwise, people would have had to go without. This store was the one and only shopping area in Royal Oak. Apparently, the snow was so high that my older brothers actually skied on barrel staves out of the second-story window.
Biggest snowstorm they ever had,
Yeah.
1916.
In his spare time, after working many hours at the store, my dad loved to walk. He was a dedicated Christian man who never lost his faith and was a strong believer in the power of prayer. He would walk at least twice every Sunday from Royal Oak Store to Wilkinson Road, United Church, at 4274 Wilkinson Road, which he helped build with his friend George Pringle. A distance of 3 miles each way. Dad was deeply involved in all aspects of this church from 1905, when he became a member, to 1923, when they moved to Esquimalt. Dad was a tenor and sang in the choir for the Wilkinson Road Church. He had a lovely voice. He was also a member of the board for the church. He became a lay minister, was often asked to give sermons at other small churches in the area.
Lake Hill, for one.
Yeah. On one of his walks in 1903, he took a shortcut through the field to the church. He walked through the tall grass and noticed a light fedora hat. When he looked around again, he saw the form of a man lying not more than 2 feet away from him. Back on the road again, he had the good luck to meet Chief Jailer R.J. John as he was driving by. Several effects at the site convinced Chief Jailer John that the body was that of a Mr. David Ferguson, who had mysteriously vanished 3 months before. A reward of $1,000 had been posted for information regarding the man's disappearance. However, after investigating further, Dad discovered the time had lapsed for collecting the reward. Wouldn't you just know it? Oh, goodness. When we were looking through the photographs to put this story together, we came across, and you'll probably enjoy looking at this, a letter that my grandpa had written on Royal Oak Grocery Stationery, April the 2nd, 1912. So I'll pass that so you can just take a look, and I've included that in the book. It's interesting, this letter, he was writing to his brother, his younger brother. I think he was,
Yeah, quite a bit younger.
about 16 years younger than Grandpa. And he's telling him about the history of the family and whatnot. I won't go into that, but he did build a store on Rose Street, house on Rose Street, and the family were at the house, and Grandpa was at the store out here. So, I mean, it was quite a ways to go, I guess, from Rose Street to Royal
Right.
Oak in those days.
Yeah.
And it says, I suppose I told you before that I sold my business at Strawberry Vale. I've purchased the Royal Oak store about 4 miles out from Victoria, and so far it's turning out well. I have not yet got the family out with me, but go home 2 or 3 times a week. I am postmaster at Royal Oak, and you had better address your letters to Royal Oak Post Office, West Victoria, BC. It was interesting to read this letter and learn of the history of my father's family in England. 4 of his siblings died at a very early age. He was no doubt bringing his brother up to date in the family because there were 16 years difference between him and his younger brother, William Ewart Pimlott. Dad and brother George built up a very good business in Royal Oak, but the boom which had been sweeping over the country from 1911 suddenly burst in the fall of 1914 with the outbreak of World War I. George retired from the business in 1916 and enlisted in the army and went overseas. I remember Dad telling me how excited he was when he bought his first car around 1920. I've got a photo of it in the book, actually. Dad is in the driver's seat on the left in this picture. He was showing some property on Grange Road or Wilkinson Road area to real estate people from, I believe it was Riffett's Realty. together with some interested buyers who are in the horse-drawn vehicle. So there's pictures in here. Eventually, Dad moved the family upstairs in the store. He carried on the business till 1923, when due to heavy fall in business and too much mortgage burden, and of course, debts owing to the store by customers, nobody had any money in those days, he was finally forced to close the store. Dad was glad to just let everything go. So Dad's the youngest of 7 children. He was born in 1925. Shortly after that, they moved to Tofino for a few years, and then they moved back to Royal Oak in 1930. When the Depression hit, he says, the next 10 years were a nightmare, according to my dad, as it was the middle of the Depression and the dirty 30s. Dad supplemented his $20 old age pension by occasionally working at Fairways Grocery in Victoria, which of course isn't the Fairways that we know of, but the old Fairways, right? After moving back to Victoria, Dad acted as a guide to the blind and arranged functions for the CNIB, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, at Sunshine Camp in Souk. He did this every summer from 1940 onward for more than 20 years with his friend George Pringle. I remember many times, this is my dad speaking, I remember many times going with my mother and father to Sunshine Camp in Souk to help with one function or the other. My mother did the cooking and my father looked after programming events. He also conducted their Sunday school services, their Sunday services and other Christian exercises at the camp. And his dad was a warden of the Air Raid Patrol, and on their 50th wedding anniversary, they summarize their time together. 1908, Mr. Ellis sold his farm and I bought a piece of land on the Burnside Road about 4.5 miles from Victoria. I first had some cows and took milk to the Victoria Creamery. Later, I opened up a small store and was the first postmaster, so he's reciting what he was doing. Grandpa speaking again. Purchased a lot on Rose Street, on which they built a house, in which they moved into in September 1911.
Blanchard Street now.
Yeah, we're Blanchard Street. In January 1913, our daughter Edna was born. The same year, I built a large store at Royal Oak next to the Municipal Hall. And my brother George went into partnership with me under the name Pimlott. Saying about his old age pension being $20, and he said in 1940 he became eligible for it, and which of course has been raised in the last few years, now stands at $50, which is, I personally believe, a quite reasonable amount. Okay, so about 1905 we became members of Wilkinson Road Church, being there continually till we went to Esquimalt in 1923. While at Wilkinson Road Church, I was adult Bible class teacher, later Sunday school superintendent, class leader, local preacher, secretary treasurer of the trustee board, and choir member. He was presented with an inscribed gold watch, and his wife with an ivory brush and comb set, and I think one of the family members still has that today. His mom and dad had their 60th wedding anniversary party at the Sons of Norway Hall in 1959. All of the family were there, 279 people. It was a wonderful time. Dad was 90 years old and Mom was 78. In 1963, Mom and Dad celebrated their 64th wedding anniversary, and Dad tells a New Year's story mentioned in his 1949 narration. This was captured by a reporter in the local newspaper at the time. Dad then looked thoughtfully at Mom, who was busy knitting for the Red Cross, and Dad said, "I believe that having shared bad times along with the good all these years has brought us closer together more now than ever before." My father, Dad, passed away in Victoria on the 28th of April 64 at the age of 94, having been married to the same woman, my mother, for almost 65 years. Dad would have been proud to know that the municipality of Saanich named a street after him, Pimlott Place. Many years later, Pimlott Place is in Royal Oak, turn off of Wilkinson Road, driving north, then right onto Greenlee, then left off Viaduct, and then right onto Pimlott Place. There's a picture of Dad standing out in front of Pimlott Place. The Pimlott name goes back to the Norman invasion of 1066. And we have the crest and everything on the sheet there. Dad had 7 brothers and sisters. and there was George and Elsie and Alfred and Charles and Edna, Alice, and then Dad. There was quite a stretch of years between Dad, or your dad, born in 1870, and Dad, born in 1925. He was 55 years old when he was born. Even my oldest brother, George, was 25 when I was born. When I got out of hand, it wouldn't take long before one of my brothers, George...
One of my brothers would get after me.
Alfred Charlie would take over their knee and give me what for.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So when the dirty 30s arrived, my parents had to sell their two-story house behind the Royal Oak store and moved into the suite in the top of the store. I remember my brothers having a great old time, lifting me up and down in the dumbwaiter and then letting me drop from the second floor. Boys will be boys.
That's what happened to me.
I also remember watching my two brothers, Charlie and Alf, playing many exciting games of basketball in the Royal Oak Community Hall right next to the store. Their basketball team was called the Royal Oaks. Yeah. I remember many family trips to my sister Elsie's house in Nanaimo on the 24th of May weekend, as well as July 1st weekends. All of us would either go in George's big truck, George Massey's truck, or Charlie's truck. It would take almost all day to get there after leaving early in the morning from Victoria. There were always rock slides to clear along the road. We had to take extra tires to change along the way. The road was so rocky, we often punctured or blew out a few tires. There were no paved roads in those days. Taking those trucks over the Malahat was quite a feat at the time. We threw Chesterfields in the back of open-air trucks, and these would be filled with 2 or 3 families. All of us would stay at Auntie Elsie's house, Mom, Dad, and all the kids, 19 in all. We would sleep everywhere. On the table, under the table, in the wood box, beside the stove, the small couch in the sitting room, on the 2 beds, and as a last resort, the bathtub. When we went up island on Sunday, we would all take the ferry over to Newcastle Island off Nanaimo Harbor. We'd get all dressed up in our Sunday best, and some of the women even wore fur coats. The men would carry the food and would have a picnic lunch and the picnic there. We played games like softball, had foot races, and even played horseshoes. We had a great fun with all the family. We would take the ferry back to Nanaimo and then begin our long trek home back to Victoria. My Uncle George and his daughter Gladys belonged to a marching band for many years in Nanaimo called Nanaimo Silver Cornet Band. This band is still playing in Nanaimo. Uncle George had his own orchestra, the Pimlott Orchestra. There's a picture of it here. This group started in the late 1920s and kept going until 1950s. They played the big band style music, which is great for dancing. They usually played at the Pygmy Pavilion dance floor, which is built on springs in Nanaimo on Saturdays. Friday nights they'd play downstairs in the Nanaimo Oddfellows Hall and also travel the northern part of Vancouver Island around Parksville and Comox and out to Port Alberni. Uncle George played the piano, and I have a picture of him practicing at my sister Elsie's house, and there's a picture here. Sadly, all of my brothers and sisters, Dad saying, have passed away, and now I'm the sole surviving child of James William and Louisa Mary Pimlott.
Thank you, dear.
He went to war and was in the services in the Navy and survived the war, so he's a veteran. He experienced almost being swept away to sea, and his friend George Beatty caught him and saved him so he did not die at sea. And again, this book would be a lot shorter. And then another situation happened during the wartime is one of the depth chargers came loose in rough seas, a 350-pound depth charger, and it ran over his ankle and squished his ankle. So 1945, he was sent home to have to recuperate from this and had to have a walking cast installed. And so he was off for about a month, and then he signed up for Japan as well, and then of course the bomb was dropped, so he didn't have to go. So he after the war, he did some logging out in this area, wasn't it? Where was it? Souk area. Anyway, and with his money that he got from the war, you know, their establishment.
Reestablishment
credit.
Yeah.
He bought some land.
Property
and
out in Burnside.
Yeah, he bought the land and was logging it and thought he better have a partnership drawn up. So he went to Monteith, Barclay Monteith's office, and this helpful secretary helped him out, and that's what I ended up doing too, as a legal secretary. Anyway, Mom helped him do whatever he had to do, and he signed the documents in front of the lawyer, and da-da-da-da. He's walking down the street one day, and he says, "Haven't I met you somewhere before?" to this lady. And
she said no, and she stuck her nose up in the air and walked off. She thought I was trying to pick her up.
Oh, goodness. He said that he knew he'd seen this girl somewhere before, but couldn't remember her. "Haven't I met you?" No. Later, she informed me her name was Ruth Henderson. She lived on Gorge Road area. She was legal secretary from the office where we had our partnership agreement drawn up. I thought at the time she was a rather attractive young lady, and I wondered if she would ever think of going on a date with me. I found the courage to ask her, and I said I was supposed to be going to a dance with my girlfriend on Saturday, but she's mad at me. So would you go with me if she won't?
What a way to ask, eh?
With that, for whatever reason, she just walked away. I took a chance a few days later and phoned her house and left a message with her mother, who was really nice to me. When Ruth arrived home from work, her mother told her some fellow called but didn't leave his name, and he would pick her up at 8 o'clock on Saturday night.
Have her back by 12.
At the appointed hour, I walked up to the front door, and this beautiful young lady answered. I asked her, "Is your sister home?"
She had her hair above her head and a big fur cape on. I didn't think they was the same girl.
To which she replied, "It's me, I'm Ruth." She looked amazing with her hair all up on the top of her head, her makeup on, wearing a beautiful dress and carrying a fur coat over her arm. I honestly didn't recognize her. As she looked out towards the street, she noticed I was driving a nice new car. She must have thought I was loaded to be able to afford this. Little did she know that I had just rented it for the night and had to have it back by midnight. Oh, goodness sake, so that's cute. Somebody had mentioned Mary Lou Pimlott, and Mary Lou Pimlott was their little flower girl. And
My brother's daughter.
Charlie's
daughter.
Yeah. Mary Lou Pimlott, niece of the groom, was the flower girl and wore a floor-length gown of blue taffeta and carried a nosegay of rosebuds and sweet peas. All the attendants had coronets of tiny rosebuds and sweet peas in their hair. My niece, Mary Lou Pimlott, who was only 5 years old at the time, was our flower girl at the wedding. She thought she would help us out by passing around the sandwich tray. Unfortunately, all the sandwiches were already eaten, but she wanted to keep passing the plate around with nothing on it but parsley. So they had their wedding at Strathcona Hotel on Douglas Street. Both sides of the family were there, and both of them were teetotalers. So we weren't able to have an alcoholic punch served at the main reception. We already had a punch room for the rest of the family arranged upstairs. I remember one of the guests saying, "This punch is all arms and legs and no body." One of us replied, "You'll find the body in room 222. Then we didn't see them for the rest of the night. On my mom's side, the Hendersons all were in the grocery business. So we had Henderson's Jubilee, Henderson's at 5 Points, at Fairfield,
Yeah.
Henderson's Food Market, and then my dad ended up getting in the grocery business. And I mean, there weren't many things that were great about the grocery business, because we would get the cans with no labels on, and you didn't know whether it was dog food or soup when you opened it, you know. So I remember that. I do remember that. But one of the things, my dad met a lot of people, and he's very well loved in Oak Bay. And it wasn't long because of his work with Qantas and Silver Threads and everything, that he got on council. And he was on council for 12 years, I think, something like that, yeah. Anyway, and so he was sort of working his way up. And I must tell you, the first thing he ever did was to deliver coal. That was what he did when he first started.
Yeah.
You know, everybody has to do something to make your way up. Anyway, so that's what he did when he started. And with going through the war and whatnot, he certainly knew a lot about the services and whatnot. And so Al McKinnon was running for MP, and Dad helped get him elected. Anyway, he ended up being appointed to the board of Veterans Pension Review Board. And so when he went in 1979, was it? Anyway, it ended up to be Ottawa, and then went to PEI. And so Dad was there for about
6 years in Ottawa, and then they moved the whole Department of Veterans Affairs to Charlottetown
Yeah.
in Prince Edward Island. And I was there 12 years, and I ended up being chairman of the appeal court there.
He ended up to be the only Western, non-bilingual, non-lawyer Western ever appointed as a chairman of the board. And I'm proud to say, I mean, all the things you hear about veterans and their pensions and whatnot, my dad's percentages of approvals for veterans pensions went from 14% to 44% while my dad was on the board.
With the help of a couple
Oh,
of
he worked really
good
hard.
MPs.
Yeah, he worked really hard. Also got his CLU designation, which is the Chartered Life Underwriter. That took him 5 years. And if he hadn't had all that, then he wouldn't have ever got that appointment. So it was good because he had that law background. But anyway, that's his background. He came back to Victoria with Mum, and they were tying yellow ribbons around the old oak trees. And Dad had to have emergency open heart. And so $5 of every book goes to the Heart and Stroke Foundation. He survived open heart, obviously. I got involved with heart stroke, and I've been a volunteer for 30 years now. And I'm proud to say we've raised in the Cowichan Valley $4.5 million since in the last 30 years. So we've had lots of events. But in any event, that's only my side of the story. Dad's, you've had lots of holidays all over around the world. We've been involved in Trois Rivières, which is one of the ships he was on, Navy reunion. They moved back to Royal Oak, into Royal Oak Berwick, and they've been there for 6 years. Sadly, my mother has memory problems now, so we've had to move them out to Sydney. Mom's in All Care and Dad's in Amica, two houses over, so he can see her every day. We just came from there, actually. We tried to get this book together for the 65th, which we did. We were successful. Now I know what it's like to write a book and put it together with Dad's
You don't want to do
help.
another one.
Yeah. Anyway, this is our 3rd printing. We've donated $1,100 to Heart and Stroke Foundation already. And I just want to read one little quote, and then I'm done, and you can ask my father any questions. Maybe some of those things that I mentioned are bringing up questions for you. I just want to read this quote from Lydia Millett from the Globe and Mail, September 23rd, 2006. "When we die, if we leave behind written accounts of ourselves, we can still talk to the living on down through the years." And that's part of what we've done, is put notes to the family, basically what to do to be successful in your life in the back chapter. So all of our children have a copy of the book, and certainly thank you for inviting us today. But Dad, you've got some notes about some people, and I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Well, it was just a few people that I can remember. Been away for a while, so I'll, oops, not falling apart at me. But I thought that that I remember the Quicks out here and the Whiteheads, the Vals, the boys that used to ride the bikes, 6-day or the bike race into Victoria. The Campbells that used to be out here. My brother married Jean Campbell, and there was Gert and Gladys. I think they were twins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Masseys, who had the gas station in Royal Oak, the Buster and George, and my sister married George Massey. There was the Haywoods that used to look after some Spanish affairs. And George Pringle, of course. The post office chap, Jones, and Mrs. Scott, who used to live down the lane from Royal Oak, in a little house right down the lane, and I'm trying to think of some of these others. And I think the Pettits had a store later on, a little closer to here. And Bob Cuddy was the mailman, and Exton's had a farm on Blandford Avenue, and I knew Vernon very well. And what else? Oh, just a thing there. At one time, the government of the day gave milk out to the kids for school, get them nourished
Healthy.
when they were having problems. Yeah. I can't think of anything else. And the McMorrins were over on the other side. And there's the Allisons. And can't think of anything else. Oh, the Allisons, they used to be bus drivers. There was two Allisons, bus drivers to the coach lines. Remember? What was that?
One was Carl Allison.
Carl was, yeah. Carl's the other one. Good for you. Yeah. Yeah. I just a few names that I can remember. I was only 5 when I left Royal Oaks. So I went back into the city. But yeah. Anyway, I appreciate what my daughter has got together, and hope it's given you some idea of what we've done and what the family's done, and hope it's brought to mind a few things for you.
Has anybody got any questions you'd like to ask?
Did you go to North Ward School?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and then pick high afterwards?
Yeah. North Ward School, I think it started, I'm not sure whether it started grade 1 or not, but it went up to grade 8. We thought it was a United Nations a school because there were so many Chinese and East Indians and local natives, there, that we had quite an assortment. Like, you didn't know who was going to be playing games with you or studying with you, But Vic High was great. I only had a couple of years there, and then I joined the Navy, and the war was on, so I did my CLU chartered life underwriter after that, and I wrote that, separately. So that was my education. I wasn't well educated, but I got educated in a lot of other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In 2001, September the 10th, 2001, we had a reunion of the Trois-Rivières Navy fellows, and I actually met the fellow that saved my father's life, George Beatty, at that time, so I was pretty thankful, that's for sure. And one of the other things that Dad did when you just found out you were appointed as board chair, he met Smokey Smith when he was
Oh, you heard of Smokey
speaking.
Smith.
Yeah.
He was a great hero for Canada. And I had the pleasure of meeting him in Vancouver. I guess we had about 25,000 of the Legion members there. And it was quite thrilling to have it all. Anyway, that gives you an idea what the book is like, and some parts of it you most likely wouldn't want to read, but there's other parts that you might be interested in.
Certainly a sense of humor right through the whole thing.
We tried to keep it light.
Yeah, for sure.
So Norm, is that Smoky Smith Crescent, just up above the Pipeline Road, is that the name for him?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah, he was a great hero, actually. Yeah. And my brother logged with a team of horses out at Sioux years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And then he got, 2 or 3 trucks, and so
Yeah.
he was in the in the logging business for a long time.
Did he put up the tallest?
Yeah, the tallest totem pole in Victoria,
Yeah.
down in Beach Mill Park, he hauled that in, and and some of the, I think they've perhaps changed the ones in the athletic park, but he did put some in the athletic park as well. I don't know what more I can add. Yeah.
Yeah.
You said your family were Normans, 1066, were they English or Normans?
Scottish.
They were
Scottish, eh?
They ended up on my
always
plaque.
Yeah,
I'm Scottish.
yeah,
I
yeah.
always thought I was English.
Yeah.
My dad was born in Lancashire, or in Manchester.
Manchester.
So you know, I thought, but they must have drifted down from Scotland. But we've been sort of I would think that we have a bit of Scotch in us. Yeah. Not the drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. We have a Pimlott family Bible that was actually, Dad has it, but we passed it along already to my brother, who's the eldest. And the book was 1814 version of the Pimlott family Bible, and all our history has been recorded in the front of the book. So, and it's passed down to the eldest son.
It helped us with some of, the bookmaking, being able to refer back to the Bible. I've enjoyed coming out and meeting you all, and I feel like I know you a little better, which is nice. But I've passed this church many times, and I've noticed it here, and it's been here a long time, and it's wonderful that you're being able to carry on as well as you are, and doing well. And God bless you.